on, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today, one of my favorite tutorials I've ever made, one of my favorite things I'm so excited to teach you about. We're going to be creating 3D characters. You may be asking yourself, why do I need to create a 3D character? Learning the skill opens up so many different doors of opportunity. You can create album art doing this. You can create animations for your music videos or any other videos with your 3D characters. You can even 3D print the models that you design and have physical collectibles. You can sell them as NFTs, whatever. It's all up to you. I think it's a great moneymaker. I think it's fun. I think you can really get creative with this. First, we're going to start with some inspiration. I want to show you guys some examples. The beautiful thing about this, you don't have to create it in the style that I'm going to show you. There's many different styles. There's many different ways where you guys can really create some cool stuff. We're going to be trying to create a 3D juicewrld. I really love how a lot of these look. You can really get some like interesting stylistic cartoon designs. This guy is Nick Barron. I'm gonna leave his Instagram down below. He creates some really amazing stuff, everything from NFTs, different album artwork, different little stylistic animations. This one's showing Mac Miller in different styles. Really cool. You guys can of course build on this. I'm going to show you the absolute basics for getting started. Here's another awesome guy, Cat Yum. I'm pretty sure he's worked with Rip and Dip before, so he's done this in like commercial aspects. Here you can see the 3D creation with Trippy Red holding it. So again, really cool, really fun. Let's dive in and show you exactly how you can do it yourself for free using Blender. And before we dive in, as always, I do want to say, if you're new here, consider subscribing, slap a like on the video. If you do enjoy, it means a huge amount to me with the YouTube algorithm. Comment down below anything you'd like to see next. Let's get started. If you guys don't have Blender installed, go ahead and install it. The link will be down below. Like I mentioned earlier, 100% free. We're not using any plugins. We're going to keep it all beginner friendly. Once you're in Blender, we of course need our base mesh. This is a big step for determining the style of your character. You guys have two options here. Option number one, you can completely start from scratch and you can model your own base mesh. Or option number two, you could just download any free cartoony base mesh yourself. You can search for any of those base meshes on something like CG Trader, on TurboSquid. There's tons of free ones. I'll leave a link to the free one I use below. And of course, if you want to do it all from scratch, I'll leave some tutorials where you can set up reference pictures and fully craft it all starting from nothing. I think the base mesh is just a bit easier. A, it saves you time. We can customize the base mesh to our liking in a bit to fit our needs. If you're planning on making multiple different versions, it's nice to just have a base mesh ready to go. So choose your option here. I'm going to start off with my base mesh here. So once you've installed that for free using the link below, I'm going to go ahead and click File, Import, and I'm going to import in our FBX. They're going to give you two options here, the high poly and the low poly. We're going to go with the low poly because we're going to customize a bunch of this. We don't want tons of information and polygons. So here's our base mesh. If I zoom in here, you can tell everything doesn't look as smooth. To make everything a bit more smooth, with our base mesh selected, we're going to go down to the object data properties. And under the normal section here, we're just going to check off auto smooth. And you should see everything look a lot more clay-like. So now let's get into our creative phase. Let's figure out what we're going to be designing and start getting an overall vision of what it will look like. To make this easier, I recommend you use reference images. So we're going to try and create juicewrld from the Armed and Dangerous video. I went on Google Images and I just saved this reference picture here. It also shows the clothing he's wearing, which will be useful later when we go in and design that. To bring that into Blender as a reference, if you go up to Edit and Preferences, and go on to the add-on section, you guys can search for import images as planes. Go ahead and check that on. And then all you have to do is go up to File, Import, and then click Images as Planes. Find your reference image and import that in. To see the image on your plane, you want to change to the viewport shading mode in the top right. And with that plane selected, if you need to rotate, just go ahead and click that orange square, the object properties, and you can change any of those values to align it properly. You can place that in your scene just by selecting it and clicking G to move it around. You can click S to scale it down. And now we have a good little reference setup, a good workstation to start designing our character. So let's start off by adding in our eyes. In object mode, we're going to click Shift A, and then we're going to add in a sphere. You can scale and move the sphere around using G and S and position it on the face where the eyes would be. Once you have that first eye in place, we can select that sphere, click Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy and paste it, and then move that duplication over into position as our second eye. To smooth the eye out, just select the object, go up to that little object tab in the top left, and go to Shade Smooth. So pay attention to the steps that we just did because it's an important concept for the rest of this workflow. We're adding in different basic objects and then manipulating them to fit our character. I'll dive into this a bit more once we get into making more complex facial features, and I'll tell you about my 3-step process for modeling anything from scratch. So stay tuned. For now, let's just keep working with the basics. So let's add in some materials, and we'll start with the skin. So select our base mesh. We're going to go down to our material properties tab, and we're just going to click the little plus sign to create a new material. You can double click and name that skin. So under base color, just click on it. Because we have that reference image already pulled up, we can just click the little eyedropper tool, select the exact skin color. Easy as that. So great, let's go back to the eyes for a second, and we're going to add in some pupils. I'm going to click Shift A and then add in another sphere. We're going to select that pupil object, and in the object data properties, so that little tab with the orange square, under scale, we're just going to squash the sphere a little bit by changing one of those scale values so it's more oval shaped, and then we can click G and S to scale and position it over top of the eye where we want it. You also want to make a material for the pupil, so select it, go to your material properties, click the plus sign to make a new material and name it pupil, and then just change the base color to black. Go ahead and click Control C, Control V with that pupil selected, and then by clicking G, just move the duplicated pupil over to the second eye. So now let's add in some eyebrows using similar steps to what we just did before. I'm going to click Shift A, and this time I'm going to add in a cylinder. So again, just like we did with the eye, you can position it using G, you can scale it using S, go to your material properties and create a little eyebrow material. So again, just like before, material properties, plus sign to make a new one, choose your base color, duplicate that to add the second one. Once you have those two eyebrows, and you're good to go. So you have the basics of modeling down, just using those primitive objects and positioning them where you want. What if you want to create something a little bit more complex? For example, our facial hair. There's only so far circles, cubes, and cylinders can take you. So let me show you the 3-step method that's going to make modeling anything extremely simple. Like before, in object mode, we're going to click Shift A and we're going to add in another cylinder. So step number 1, you want to create the basic shape using your primitives. But this time we're going to shape the cylinder so that it's in the rough shape of a mustache. You want to kind of create like a Minecraft version of what it's going to look like. So to do this, we need to switch over to edit mode. So select our mustache, click tab to quickly switch over to edit mode. These options over here on the left, you're going to see you can either select the vertices, the edges, or the faces. Let's go to face select mode, and then we're going to select the top part of that cylinder, and we're going to click E to extrude the face. So this is extremely important here, guys. Make sure you note these few couple of shortcuts. E to extrude is extremely important. Once you've clicked E and you've extruded the face and you left click to put it in place, with that face still selected, you can click G to move it around. You can click S to scale it up and down, or you can click R to rotate it. So use those different positioning tools to again create your little Minecraft rough draft shape of a mustache. If you need to, keep extruding, so you click E, extrude it a bit, click S, scale it a bit if you need to. Once you have your basic rough shape, let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is smooth the mesh out. So you have the rough shape of what you're trying to make, but it's just a little bit too sharp and blocky. You can select your mesh, you can go over to the modifiers tab, and you can add a subdivision surface. This splits the faces into smaller parts, making them look more smooth. Just make sure you guys don't go overboard with this, because the more you subdivide into smaller parts, the higher the poly count gets. So if you have something with a super high poly count, it's going to use up a lot of memory, it's going to raise your file sizes, and it's going to make your computer start chugging a lot. So again, just be careful, make sure you don't subdivide too many times, and that should make things look a lot better. Now, step 3, you have your general shape, you have it smoothed out, but maybe you just need to finalize the look a bit more, make a tiny bit of changes. How do you do that? Step 3 is by using your sculpting tools. So if you select your object, and just like we went into edit mode before, you want to click that little drop down and go to sculpting mode. Here you can use any of these sculpting tools to shape this object in any which way you want. You can add texture using this. You can do a bunch of different stuff. Stick to the basics and just find the grab tool. It's the little yellow one here. Use that grab brush. You can change radius, you can change strength, whatever. Just use that grab brush and try and shape the mustache a little bit better. Very simple, very easy. Once you've done that, let's add the mustache to the other side of the face. Back in object mode, just Control C, Control V to paste it. And then in your object data properties, find your rotation, change your rotation so that it's on the flip side of the face. So let's quickly review that 3-step process. So step number one, you want to create a primitive, so a cube, a circle, a cylinder. You want to use the extrude tool, the grab tool, the scale tool to create a basic shape of what it is you're trying to make. Step number two is you want to smooth the mesh out. So you want to subdivide it by going to the modifiers tab, adding a subdivision surface and just bumping those sliders up a bit. And step number three, to finalize the shaping, you go to sculpt mode and you use that grab tool or any other different sculpting tool just to finalize the look. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a small beard this time. This time I'm going to use cubes. So again, Shift A, create a cube, and we'll name it beard. I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to select the face of the cube. I'm just going to click E to kind of pull it out a little bit. I'll click G to move it around. And again, I'll just keep doing that until I have a rough shape of our beard. Next, we'll smooth it out, add those subdivisions, shade it smooth, and then sculpt it. Voila, we have our facial features. So keep that in mind. That's a very essential step for creating any of the little small parts on the face. So before we move on to the hair, there are two quick tips that I want to mention. Number one, let's go back to the eyes, and we talked about smoothing. If your eyes are kind of jagged on the edges, you can just add a quick little subdivision onto them just to smooth those out. Number two, you guys can use any of these steps that we just talked about to alter the facial features in any way. So for example, you guys could select the base mesh, you could extrude to try and make like a mouth shape. You could add in teeth just by clicking Shift A, using those steps that I showed you, and making like a different facial expression. You guys can make eyelids, alter the face with the sculpting tools, alter the eyes. Step 4, determining the style that you're trying to create. So Blender is your oyster, have fun with the process, and keep those steps in mind while you're putting together your final piece. Now for the hair. There's two different ways that you guys can do this. The first way is similar to how we made the eyes in the facial hair, where you click Shift A, you add in a sphere, you name it hair, and you just kind of place it on the head using your grab tools, your scale tools, and then you use the sculpt mode to sculpt the hair to your liking. So that's one way. The second way, and this is the way that I did it, the method for how we're going to do this is important because it's similar to how we're going to make the clothes in Blender later on. I like to select the object, I like to switch to edit mode, and then I like to select the faces where I want the hair to be. So just use your selection, grab the little circle selection tool, hold down Shift, and just select all of the different parts of the hair. And make sure you take your time here. Make sure you don't miss any parts, because whenever you create the mesh out of this, you'll have like a big missing chunk. Once you have that hair base selection, you want to click Control D, and you want to right click as soon as you do that to put a duplication right in the same spot where the selection is. Now what you can do with everything still selected, just right click on the selection, and you want to go down to separate and separate by selection. So in your object tray on the right, you can rename this duplication to hair base. Let's give this hair a bit of volume. With the hair selected, we're going to go to modifiers and we're going to add a solidify modifier. You can change the offset to something around 1 or 0.8, and that'll just kind of puff it up a bit more. You can just go down to your material properties, create a new material, name it hair base, and you could go down to your base color and just source your reference image for the color of the hair. Also, make sure you select that skin texture and click the little negative just so that the hair base material is the one that is assigned. So now for the specific dread parts of the hair, we're gonna do this similar to how we added the facial features with a couple of different steps. So first off, what we're gonna do is we're gonna click Shift A and we're just gonna start with a cylinder. So with our cylinder selected in edit mode, we're gonna go ahead and extrude the top face around 5 times. So just click E, drag it up a couple of times. Then we can just go and use our sculpt tool like we've been doing for everything else, that 3-step process, to get the rough shape. Use references here if you guys are stuck, either cartoony references or real world references, just to kind of get a rough shape from different angles. So make sure you're rotating around in Blender and sculpting the way you want. So now let's create a custom material so that we have this sort of color gradient for the dreads, because as you see, it's sort of blonde, it's sort of darker near the top, and then as you go down, it gets more blondish. To do that, let's go and open up our shader editor with our dread piece selected. Also, if you haven't already, go to your material properties with it selected and just create a new material for the hair. Once you've done that, you should be able to see the nodes pop up in your shader editor. We're gonna click Shift A, and we're gonna add in a color ramp node. Go ahead and connect that to the base color of your main principal BSDF shader. On your color ramp, you want to select the right input and change the color to black. And on the left input, you want to change the color and use your color dropper to pick a correct hair color from your reference image. Sometimes the color dropper can be muddled, so if you need to, go ahead and just tweak that color a little bit. Next, we're going to click the plus sign to add another input point for our color ramp. And then again, use your color picker tool and select another part of the hair. That way we can have this sort of gradient going from lighter on the far left, have a little bit of a mid-tone in the middle, and then black on the right. I'm just going to readjust those input points so that I have the correct gradient that I want for the hair. Once you've done that, go ahead and click Shift A and add in a mapping node. Connect the vector section to your color ramp, and then click Shift A again and add in a texture coordinate node. And then go ahead and connect that generated section to the vector section on the mapping node. From here, you can use the mapping node to change around the scale, the X and Y positioning, the rotation, until you have that color ramp projected the way you want it. And again, to smooth this all out, we're just gonna go to the modifiers and add in another subdivision surface and bump up those settings slightly. We have a nice smooth piece of hair. So once you have that material locked in, we're gonna go ahead and just duplicate this dread piece a couple of times. We're just gonna scale, rotate, and move them around the head and position them in a way that we want. And this is a huge tip here, guys. Pay attention to proportions. Even though we're working in a cartoony fashion, so things are not as correctly proportional, you want to make sure that the hair is a correct scale. You want to make sure that the eyes aren't too small, aren't too beady. Really take your time here and make sure everything looks the way you want. I think that's the biggest mistake I see people make, is they make the eyes too small, the hair too small for the head. So again, it just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of experimenting with your scale, positioning, so on and so forth. Once you're happy with where these dread pieces are placed, go ahead and grab your sculpt tool, and you can kind of use the grab tool to push them down onto the head or make any other little adjustments if you'd like. All right, you've made great progress so far. Before we start on the clothing, I'm gonna show you guys our lighting setup. So if you guys want, you can use the timestamps. If you prefer to create the clothes before we do all the lighting, before we set up the camera, you could do that and then just come back here after. Either way, let's go ahead and create our camera and position it. So I'm gonna delete the default camera, and I'm gonna click Shift A and just add in a new one. Then what I'm gonna do is just go into camera view by clicking the little camera button. And then with our camera selected, you can go down to your object data properties and just change the little position sliders until you have everything framed the way that you want it. Now let's go in and add in our lighting. So we'll pop off of camera view. Make sure you guys change to the viewport shading rendered view so you can actually see how things are gonna react with the light. We're gonna click Shift A, and we're gonna add in first our key light. So add in our key light, we're gonna give it a 45-degree angle. So just go down to your object data properties. On your rotation, just give it a bit of a turn. Make sure it's pointed at your subject. Under our light settings, I give it like 100 watts of power. I try not to change that value, and then I'll just go in and change around the environment, everything else, to tweak the final look. So let's add in our fill light. We can click Shift A again, add in another area light. And this time we'll just position it on the right side. And again, we'll object data properties, angle it towards our character. This will remove the shadows on the other side that our key light is creating. Next, what I'm gonna do is just add in a 3D cyc as our background. So I found this cyclone model online. I'll leave the link below. It's kind of just like a ramped studio stage. I'm just gonna file and import in that FBX, just scale it up a bit. I'll go to my material properties for it, and I'll just create an orange base color. And of course, you guys can choose whatever color you want. The cyclone gives a nice little gradient for the lighting, and then you can add in some backlights. So this will add a bit of depth from our background. It'll also kind of give a little bit of illumination on the ears, the hair. So pretty simple. Again, Shift A, add in our light, angle it, point it at the back. You guys can go in and just experiment with other lights if you'd really like. I added another backlight with a bit of purple color just for some color accenting. It's really up to you. Once you have that basic 3-point lighting setup, you're pretty good to go in terms of cinematic lighting quality, and it gives it a nice studio feel. To finish it all off, I'm gonna go to the environment settings here, and I'm gonna load in an HDRI. So you guys can go to polyhaven.com. I'll leave that link below. And you can go to the HDRI section and search for any of these HDRIs. An HDRI is basically a 360 environment. When we plug it into our scene, it's gonna change the reflections and the lighting and how all those things react with our model. So let's load it in to the base color here. We'll just go to environment texture, and we'll just play around with the strength until we get something we want. You guys can play around with the textures on your actual character just to mess around with the skin tones, make things more reflective or less reflective. we can select our base mesh, which has our skin material. And in our material properties, I'm just gonna play around with the specular and the roughness until I have the skin looking the right way. You don't have to mess with this much. I think the only other thing I did here was click on the pupils and I just made them a lot more specular, bumped down the roughness so I could have that sort of like shiny cartoon look in the eyes. Another side note here, I'm doing all this in the Eevee renderer, which is a lot faster. At the end, we're going to render in cycles, which looks a lot better in my opinion, but it is more taxing. It's harder to navigate. So I recommend put everything together in Eevee. At the end, we're gonna switch to cycles and I'll show you all of my render settings. All right, so that's that. I think the only other thing I did was duplicate the pupils one more time, flatten them out and just make them white. It made the eyes a bit more basic and just kind of popped out a bit more. Thought that looked cool. Let's put some clothes here. We don't want our character in the nude the whole time. So let's talk about how I go about doing that. So I do want to say I do prefer to use a software called Marvelous Designer for 3D clothes. You can sew the parts together. It's nice for dynamic movements in the cloth. There are a lot of Blender add-ons that allow you to do the same thing. But if you just want some quick, basic clothes, here's what you can do just within Blender. And if you do want to see some Marvelous Designer stuff down the line with this workflow, let me know down in the comments. I'm definitely down to do something like that in the future. Let's go ahead and just select our base mesh and we're going to switch over to edit mode. You also want to check on X-ray mode here, this little button, just so whenever we select things, it's going to select the parts behind it. What I like to do is click and hold on our circle select and grab the box selection tool. And I just like to select the area on the torso where our hoodie would be. So go ahead and select those parts. Make sure you're not missing any parts so there aren't any holes within the mesh. You can hold down Shift to add on to the selection. You can switch between your tools. Just make sure that's all selected out. And like we did with the hair base, we're going to click Shift D to duplicate. And then we're going to right click just to put that duplication in the exact place where it is currently. With everything still selected, just right click and go to Separate by Selection. So now we've cut out the hoodie part. You can double click on that object and name it hoodie. And to puff it up, we can go in and add a solidify modifier. So with our hoodie selected, go to our modifiers tab and add in solidify. I like to add a offset of between 1 or 0.8 or 1, just to give it a bit more depth away from the skin. You can go down to your material properties and you can create a new material, name it hoodie, and choose a base color if you'd like. We're gonna add in the exact hoodie texture from the Armed and Dangerous video in a bit. So if you have any jagged edges on your hoodie here, you guys could always click K and use the knife tool in edit mode just to kind of cut that part away. Just click, click, make a straight line, and then you can delete those faces. Or you guys can just go into sculpting mode and sort of straighten everything out. Once you have that sorted out, we're going to do the same to create some pants. Select your base mesh, grab your box selection tool, and just grab the legs. We're going to click Shift D, right click, and we're going to right click Separate by Selection and name that pants. And of course, add your solidify modifier, offset it a tiny bit. There you go. Now we have some clothing. Repeat those steps for the shoes as well. So now let's add a bit of details to the hoodie just to make it look more like a hoodie and not like a t-shirt. Right now it's sort of just a t-shirt. And then we're going to go in and add our exact texture from the music video. So first off, what you want to do is go into edit mode with our hoodie selected. And you can go and select the specific vertices to sort of taper different parts of the hoodie. For example, you can scale up the sleeves a tiny bit just by selecting them with your box selection, clicking S. You can sort of taper the cuffs on the hoodie just by selecting them, clicking S, making them a bit smaller. So again, select the different parts, sort of taper everything, give it more of a thicker material appearance. And of course, you guys can go into sculpt mode and add more intricate details if you really want. Now for the hood, this part is a bit more tricky. So because we're only rendering an image from the front facing angle, I'm not gonna go super into detail creating like a fully 360 degree hoodie. I'm just gonna do it fast and easy so it's passable as a hoodie. What you wanna do is in edit mode, you want to be in edge selection mode, and you want to alt left click on the top neckline. That should select the edge around the neck. You can click E to extrude it up, and you can click S to scale it out a tiny bit. So now you have this sort of circular collar. What you want to do is just add some 3D depth to that. So this time click E again and just left click, and then click S with that new extrusion and scale it down a tiny bit. So you have this round circular part around the neck. Once you have this ring around your neck, you can go into vertex selection mode and you can just grab the parts of the hoodie, click G and just place them in the parts that you want. So it looks a bit more like a hood over the shoulders. Of course, add your subdivision to smooth it out. You can go into sculpt mode and fully make it look the way you want. Also, side note for the hood, what I like to do, and this is personal preference, I think it's just easier once we mess with the UV mapping. You guys can separate it like we did with the other parts. With that hoodie still selected, before you do anything else, go ahead and just click Shift D, right click, separate by selection, and name it hood. And that's about it. That's how I quickly just made that little hood. Again, it's not gonna look nice in the back, but it works great just for quick images. So now let's start getting the texture from the music video onto our clothing. So luckily enough, the reference image I had the exact name of the Bape hoodie that he wore in the music video. So I'm just gonna search on Google Images and try and find a good picture of that hoodie. Once I find it, I'm just gonna right click and save it. And then back in Blender, I'm going to select our hoodie. With our hoodie selected, go down to our shader editor, and we're gonna go ahead and click Shift A, and we're gonna add in an image texture node. In that image texture node, let's go ahead and just load in the reference image that we saved from Google, and then let's connect that node into our base color for our hoodie material. So now you can see the texture on our hoodie, but it's not projected correctly. So let me show you a quick fix. So in edit mode, we're gonna go ahead and select the entire hoodie, and then we're going to switch to the UV editor mode. In the little drop down, just go ahead and select the hoodie reference image. Now we want to click U and then select unwrap. So now you should see the parts of the hoodie and how they're projected onto the image. So all you have to really do is just select the specific parts. You can select the one that looks like a torso. Obviously that's the torso part. Use your selection tools to grab all those parts. Click G, click S, click R to position it, scale it, rotate it onto the torso so that it's projected correctly. Do the same for the sleeve parts. If you guys want to add the blue color to the cuffs of the sleeve or the bottom of the hoodie, you guys could always just select the exact cuff parts and unwrap those specifically, and then again just scale it over top of the blue, or you could even just make another new material and just copy the reference color and apply it to the cuff area. So it's up to you on how you want to do those little minute details. You can do the same for the hood. Select the hood object, go to edit mode and click A to select all the parts. Open up the UV editor, click U, unwrap it, and then just position that circular hood area until you have a projection that works well. So super fast, super easy. The only downside to this is we're only setting up the UV mapping for the front perspective. So if you are creating an animation or a perspective where you can see the back, you guys will have to unwrap and do the UV projection for the back side. So keep that in mind. Reuse those steps that I just showed you if you need to do so. So to make these clothes a bit more detailed, I'm gonna load in some custom clothing normal maps. So I got these maps from Travis Davids. You can search for clothing maps online. I'm sure you can find a bunch of free ones, but either way, once you have something like this, in the shader editor for our hoodie, all you have to do is just load in an image texture node, or you could even just find the image and just drag it straight into Blender. Then connect that normal map to the normal little node connector for our main principal shader. Check out the difference, it adds a lot more realistic detail. I'm gonna do this with the pants as well. I'll just go through my clothing textures folder. I'll find one with jeans. I'll go to my pants object. I'll go to the shader editor and I'll just start dropping in those image maps and connecting them to the places that they correspond. And that is about it. From here, your character is complete. You can choose if you want to animate it, if you want to pose it. I'm going to leave you guys 2 tutorials for that below. We talked a bunch about Mixamo. So tutorial number 1, we'll talk about taking this character, plugging it into Mixamo, which is a free service owned by Adobe. It can auto-generate rigs for your characters that have none, and you can pick from a different library of animations to choose from, and then just import back in the animations. Or alternatively, you guys could use the second tutorial I'm gonna link to create a custom rig straight within Blender if you wanna animate yourself or if you just wanna put it in a different pose of your choosing. So I'll leave that down below. It's like 16 minutes, but it's more thorough than what I could tell you here. I'll go quickly through the steps for that while I show you the footage of what I did. What you wanna do is just go to Edit Preferences and enable Rigify. And then you wanna click Shift A and add in a human armature. You want to scale it down and position it in the correct place. Once you've positioned all of the bones correctly, you want to click Control A and just apply all transformations. And then in object mode, go to your armature settings and just generate an armature. Once you've done that, you can go to your pose mode and you can use your armature rig that you've just created to pose the character however you want. Again, that full tutorial will be down below. It takes that quick explanation, it shows it a bit more in depth, and it also goes through a bunch of common problems and how you can fix it. So I recommend you just watch that. So I hope you guys do enjoy. Again, slap a like if you guys would like to see a part 2. If there's enough interest in something like this, I could definitely make characters in different styles, like some of those references I showed you at the beginning. Or I could talk about making accessories, posing, animating, making 3D clothes that are dynamic and move with the movements of your animation. There's a whole world of things you could do with this, and that's why I'm excited for it. And I think that it's a great thing that you guys could do and apply to your own work to generate money or have fun with your hobby or print out collectibles or do whatever. To render this all out and admire your creation, you guys want to go to your render settings. Once everything's finalized, you can switch from EV to cycles. You can also change from CPU to GPU compute, so you can utilize your GPU in the processing, makes it a lot faster and easier. For samples, I just put it at 250. Everything came out very clean, and that's really about it. Go to your output settings from there, and you can choose the folder where you'd like to output it. I just outputted it as a PNG. If you guys want, you could do TIFF or whatever. We're only rendering the first frame here, so I'll just put the render frame start 1, frame end 1, and I'll click render animation. I love how this looks. I think there's amazing things you guys can do with this. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.